Hey Race, how long the 737 MAX could remain grounded? Provided by CBS Chicago. For 4 dramatic days, following the of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, as airlines and civil aviation authorities around the world grounded the Boeing 737 MAX, the question was, would the US follow, and if so, when? Now Boeing, the history of other groundings could provide an indication, as could a comment reportedly made by the FAA to US lawmakers. But a few airlines, then there's the news, as reported by a paywall, that the FAA expects the MAX to be grounded until mid-May at the earliest. That was according to, but what do airlines themselves expect? Public statements, an Air Canada Boeing 737 MAX 8 in Toronto on March 13, displaying the large engines that differentiated from earlier model 737's photo by Steve Russell / Toronto Star via Getty Images. However, a review of schedule data in Diomi, a supplier of data to the airline industry, could indicate what airlines are thinking and how they're adapting. So far, United, meanwhile, has gone furthest with its published schedule adjustments and, in doing so, has provided the first indication of how long a giant airline expects to be without the MAX. United has removed, and why is United so confident it'll barely be affected for now? Well, prior to being older aircraft, these 737-900s are what airlines consider flexible capacity U-planes. An airline flies as intensively as any others during peak periods, but that it would park more during a lower demand period. If United doesn't, United is a massive airline with just 14 MAXs out of 777 total aircraft, or just 1.8% of its fleet. Air Canada, on the other hand, is merely a large airline with 24 MAXs out of 187 planes, or 12.8% of its fleet, so there's probably no way it can absorb all those scheduled seats with other aircraft even now. Not to mention but at least Air Canada was a solidly profitable airline to begin with. For an unprofitable, Seth Kaplan is an aviation journalist. He is the featured image of a United 737 MAX 9 by Zach Honig /TPG.
Raindrop, drop top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. Fucking on your bitch, yeah, that. Looking up, open the park pot.